Here are today's hosts.
Good morning, everyone. This is Nathaniel Lee. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank each and every one of you for joining our show each week. We are a live call-in show, and we are live streamed on various outlets. You could Google the show Legal Issues of the Day with Nathaniel Lee to get the various sources that we've been telecast or broadcast. I have my superstar panel with me today, attorney Vanita Banks, master's in tax, a cyber security expert, former president of National Bar, a national leader, a highly skilled lawyer. And then I got the famous Milton Grimes, who led the evolution in evidence in terms of police misconduct. And, despite that case, we still have police misconduct, seem like every day. But to start our show off today, we have those, and also have a special guest, my former law partner and a judge out of Chicago, John Fairman. And Judge Fairman is been a trial lawyer at the firm. He also was active in the Cook County Bar, the National Bar, and in various entities. And you have to go on the website. It's too voluminous to talk about all the things he's done. It's about a 10-page resume, so you might visit it. It's called, just type in John Fairman for judge, and you'll be able to find it. Hey, Judge Fairman, how you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great. How are you all?
We're doing fantastic. I got my superstar panel with me today, so they may drill you a little bit, but real quickly, tell us a little bit about the type of cases you're doing up there in Cook County to ensure justice is fair and equal to all the citizens. I know you are a candidate for judge in Superior Court. We wish you a lot of luck in that regard, but tell us about what you're doing now, Judge.
So right now I have a criminal courtroom at one of the suburban courthouses outside of Chicago, but I also preside over, I handle all expungements for about 40 cities that all go to the Bridger Courthouse. And then I'm one of the emergency mental health judges for the southwest suburbs. And you all have to forgive me. I have the kids with me that all came down and now in my office.
Well, they want to appear on the show too. But that expungement is very important. There's a lot of African-American males who've gotten into some minor incident, otherwise great people, but tell us about that. How difficult it is for people to go in your court and get the records expunged, and what are the criteria?
Well, for expungements, now with the new rule changes for the state of Illinois, it has expanded it, and anyone who receives supervision for any type of misdemeanor case, that is now able to be expunged. You have a lot of first-time offender cases for felony cases such as felony gun cases, felony drug cases. A lot of the first-time offender gun cases, first-time offender drug cases, those now qualify as well upon successful completion. But then there's a huge range of cases, felony as well as criminal, usually non-violent, nothing involving dogs, nothing involving domestic, major crimes of violence, but everything else, a whole gamut of things qualify after a waiting period to be sealed so that employers and, employers, schools, and so forth cannot see it. Allow people upon successful completion to move on forward with their lives and become a productive part of society. That it's not a difficult process. They have across the county for Chicago and Cook County, they have a large number of expungement summons, but it's simple as somebody going down over to one of the local courthouses, going into the clerk's office. They can fill out the paperwork there, or they can go online to clerk of the circuit court, download the paperwork and fill it out there as well.
And so the people could do these expungement without the assistance of a lawyer?
They could. There are a number of things. Now we have more access to knowledge and social media than ever. They can just as well go on YouTube and look up the video as well. Now, if it's more complex, obviously the assistance of a lawyer is something to be beneficial. With a large number of legal aids I have on a monthly basis, you know, was it Cabrini, Legal Green, to several other legal assistance groups that are in front of me on, I think, at least 15 plus cases, you know, per for every expungement call that I do. And they're willing and able to help and do a great job advocating for folks as well. But with that said, folks who do not reach out, yes, they can do it themselves. You know, I suggest that they do a little research, even if it's just looking at some type of videos online. But this is stuff that they can download. Sometimes they can get over to the clerk's office and they may direct them over to a pro bono lawyer there at the courthouse if they need it to get all access to the paperwork and fill out the proper documentation.
Well, now you ran for judge. Tell us about that adventure.
Well, as you know, it's two types of, you have outside of federal court and state court judge, two ways to become a judge in Illinois. One, those who are appointed and those who are elected. So the elected judges are elected either countywide or in the area that they're in, i.e. sub-circuit. And the elected judges vote on the, what we call here, associate judges to, you know, come through in that vetting process. You got to be approved by 15 bar associations. You're vetted inside and out. And from that pool who successfully come through with qualified ratings, the elected judges thereafter vote for the appointed judges or the associate judges.
So when is your election for the Superior Court, right?
Yeah, for the Circuit Court here, it is on March 19th. So the upcoming election on March 19th that's coming up. And then, as you know, I've been on since since I got first elected 2019, but an election coming up on March 19th.
Okay, well, we look forward to helping you out. I know your website is up, you know, it's John Fairman for Judge, I think, correct?
It's just johnfairman.com. You're a little just plugging and the last name's easy. It's, you know, for folks listening, it's Fairman. And it's just johnfairman.com. And it should come right up.
Well, thank you. I look forward to talking to you in the future, Judge. And we look forward to you serving the great citizen of Cook County. And I know that you're fair to every individual and you take it serious. So I thank you for your service also.
Thank you. And then, Nate, do you have about 10 seconds for me to explain something on mental health?
Yeah, go ahead, sir.
So I am one of the emergency mental health judges. And what that means is for folks who have loved ones who are adults, 18 and above, that have autism, dementia, schizophrenia, or some type of mental health issue that is undiagnosed. You have a loved one that's not taking care of themselves. You have a loved one that is not eating. They're staying up at night. They're not sleeping. Something is going wrong. You don't know what. That's something, as opposed to if that person's having an episode, as opposed to calling the police and having them come in, where they're coming in they don't know that it's a mental health issue. They're coming in thinking it's an emergency. That's something that people in the state of Illinois, you can come down over to the courthouse. You can go to the state's attorney's office and tell them it's a mental health emergency. You need a order or a writ for that person and go to the hospital. That's something that would be brought over to me. I would hold an emergency hearing and look at it to determine whether or not it's an emergency. And if I do, I sign an order for that person to safely go with the police, with the ambulance, with emergency medical services to the hospital, where they will thereafter do an evaluation. Sometimes it's a situation where that person just needs, they're not taking their medication. But I've had mental health is something that's affected millions across America, across the world. But I've had everyone from doctors, lawyers, dentists, police officers, retirees, bankers. These are folks that are the best of the best. Some, but for they're taking their medication, you would never know. Mental health at first is something that's stigma nobody wants to talk about. Now it's becoming more and more common as people talk about it. But it is something that affects everyone. But there is help. There's assistance. So I would, and I'm going to do 6 mental health summits and wellness and summits across Cook County, and trying to outreach to as many people as possible, so that they know what their options are. Also, if you don't know anything at all, just remember the number 988. You can call that, and then they can assist you in regards to what you can do in a mental health emergency.
May I ask a question?
Yes, sir. Go
Please.
ahead. Counsel, please.
Good morning, Judge. Milton Grimes. I'm out here in California in the warm weather. Sorry. No, I've tried a case in Chicago on 26 in California. I love your jurors back there. They're still the same. This probably was 25 years ago. But question on mental health. So if your loved one is acting strange and bizarre and you feel that they are probably on the verge of committing some type of harm to themselves or another, can you take them to your court without the intervention of the police and set a hearing, have a hearing? And if so, are they confined until that hearing? And if you have a hearing and find that they are mentally ill, do you have the authority to commit them to an institution? And if so, for how long? How has your court changed what normally is happening in California, which is unless the person and the cops will often tell you, until I see blood or somebody injured, can't do anything.
Exactly, and that's a great question. That's exactly the reason why I wanted to mention it before I got off with you all. And that's part of the part of the mental health and wellness summits that we're doing to educate the public as much as possible. No, you don't have to wait until that person has a knife and that's walking around threatening to harm themselves or somebody else. You don't have to wait. Loved ones who are there with this person, they know whether or not this person is off. They're not taking their medication. They're not eating. They're not sleeping. That's something that they can come to the courthouse. Here they can go to the state's attorney's office, DA's office across the country, but state's attorney's office here. And that would be a hearing where I hold to determine the relationship, how they know, and whether or not it's an emergency. And that's a situation where prior to getting to that point of that person holding that knife, they're a threat to themselves or others, that we can get that person over. I sign an order for EMS along with the assistance of the police to safely take that person over to the hospital. And it's the medical staff, the experts who determine whether or not this person needs to be committed, whether or not it's for a day, whether or not they be released from medication, whether or not they be committed for a day or two or longer. But it is the doctors at the hospital that would make that determination. I sign an order for that person for EMS and the police to go in and take, they can take that person, that loved one, to the hospital.
Yeah, there's
because what's happening is,
Go ahead, sir.
No, you saying there was concern that what?
There's a concern with the intervention of law enforcement and the police. I have examined officers who tell me in a death case where a person has been shot and killed, let's say in Skid Row, that when you approach a person that lives in a community where over 30% of individuals have mental illness, do you approach that person who's acting bizarre with the same attitude that you approach a person that you don't think is having a mental problem? He said, yes. I said, why don't you train to approach suspected mental ill people with more calmness, et cetera, et cetera? He said, yes. I said, but what do you do when you're out there? Do you rush in on them and grab them? And he said, yes. So they don't.
And that's a great.
Training.
Yeah, that's a great. And the police across the country have not received the training that they should have in regards to dealing with mental health. What I applaud to people is a lot of times you have folks where there's a mental health issue or there's an emergency going on in the home. They're calling police. They're not telling them that this is mental health. And these police are coming into a situation where they think this person's a danger to not only themselves, but everybody else. They're coming in, the person's holding a knife or they're breaking something and they bust down a door. And the police are coming in as if it's a criminal issue. It's really mental health.
Right.
I tell people, if you are calling the police and this is mental health, the first things out of your mouth, not only when you're on the dispatch and you're calling 911, is mental health, mental health, mental health. But when they show up, those are the words that need to be coming out of your mouth. But my goal is prior to that, that when you know that there's something wrong and it's obvious, prior to getting to that point, come over so we can get that person. You can't, because they're an adult, you can't get them to go to the hospital. They're not voluntarily coming. They don't want to. They say they don't need it. It's a common situation. That's something that somebody needs to go over to the hospital. That's something where I can help, where I hold an emergency hearing. And upon that hearing, you make a determination that if that person, after that hearing, there is cause to take that person to the hospital. EMS is the ones who are dealing with them. Police are there, but this is EMS that's taking control, who has more training dealing with mental health. But that doesn't take away from the fact that officers across the country, the feds need to do more funding in it. The states need to as well. And that is, officers across the country need to be trained. How do you deal with mental health? When you know it is, how do you deal with it? How do you handle it? You do not approach that person the same way as you would somebody else. You cannot and you should not. And there needs to be more training, and there needs to be more funding for it.
Okay.
Judge Fairman.
Right, thank you, sir.
Go ahead, Attorney Banks.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Judge Fairman, thank you for your leadership and service. And thank you for sharing with us the expungement initiative and the mental health initiative that you just described, which from my perspective is a model for the nation. And I really applaud the summits that you will be convening across the state of Illinois. And if you can provide me offline with some of that information, I may be able to join at least one of those summits. And your initiative sounds conceptually similar to the red flag laws for gun possession. You know, the opportunity for friends and family to go into court and apprise the court of a potential deadly situation. And also with respect to expungements, you referenced Cabrini Green Legal Clinic, which I've had the honor and privilege of participating in their expungement initiative, which a few years ago, when I was able to persuade former Governor Rauner to grant clemency in a case that I handled in which a young man was convicted of marijuana possession and was unable to find work because of that possession conviction on his record. So again, thank you for your leadership. I want to call out the Cabrini Green Legal Clinic for its work as well. And also the Cook County Bar Association that has held expungement clinics in association with Cabrini Green, I'm sure, and the Circuit Court of Cook County over the years. So thank you again very much, Judge Fairman, for your leadership.
Hey, Judge, you also got a couple
thank you all
calls.
for the time.
Hey, Judge, there's a couple callers who want to ask you some questions. Let's just take them quickly. Hey, caller, you have a question for Judge Fairman? Turn your radio off up here. Hey, Judge, there's a couple callers who want to ask you some questions. Mr. Fuller, turn your radio down. Go ahead. You got a question for the judge, sir?
This is Pierre, Nate. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear. You have a question for the judge real quickly?
Well, yeah, I'll call in next week about that Fifth Circuit ruling on the Voting Rights Act, because I really want to discuss with you and the trash ruling that I got from the Seventh Circuit on my case. But because we got the judge on this week, I'll skip that. And two questions, not really a question. We needed that judge down here because as Nate can tell you, we've had a couple of mental health issues here with people that have ended up in police killings. And we have one guy swinging a blade, several months ago, and we had one fella who went off in his household. Police came in and took him down. Seemed like everything was all right, but he ended up dying. And now the police are being charged, and that's a mess. So I get it, but we don't have that here, and we don't have a hospital. We have Eskenazi Hospital here in Indianapolis, but we don't have we have a mental hospital in Logansport, Indiana, but we don't have a hospital dedicated for mental health people. And that's right there. And then one question I wanted to ask Milton, and I'll get off the line. Does Chris Darden have a chance at being elected judge in LA? And I want to thank y'all for taking my call. I appreciate it.
Your question was, does this Judge Furman, have
he
a
said
chance
Chris
of being
Darden.
He
want to know whether or not Chris Darden, who's running for judge in LA, has a chance of winning. I mean,
that's a
okay.
speculation that I would not I would not enter into. Chris has a little luggage on him behind not just the OJ case, but a few other things. I have talked with him directly about his campaign and his position on certain issues. I don't know who he is going to be running against, so I wouldn't wager to guess on what his chances are.
Okay, let's take another caller. Caller, you got a question for the judge real quickly.
Good morning. My question, you guys.
Yes, sir. I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, good. It's in regards to here in Marion County, we have 2 open judge positions that are now being looked at. And Monday, I believe, they're going to have the interviews for those judges for Marion County for the Superior Courts. And what I wanted to ask, and Attorney Lee, you may be able to answer it, is here in Marion County, with this coming up, we don't get to elect our own judges because they are going through this process of being chosen, and then 3 will be given to the governor. Based on what's going to happen on Monday when they do the interviews, are there any attorneys or are there any of the candidates that the community may want to support here in Marion County, since we don't have the option of actually voting them in?
Well, that's a very good question, caller. And it's a really lengthy answer. But in a nutshell, there are 92 counties in Indiana. Other 92 counties, 5 of the counties have a restriction on how judges are selected. Marion County, Fort Wayne, South Bend, Gary, Lake County, Chicago, and Evansville. So those are the 5 counties. And what they all have in common, each of those counties has have a population of African American greater than, say, 10, 12%. Marion County, for example, is about 29% now, but it's about 40% minorities. If you have an open, in the 87 counties, you have open competitive elections. And in those counties, primarily you get Republican judges. If you had an open competitive process in Indianapolis, every judge in Indianapolis would be Democrat. And about, probably statistically speaking, about 45% of the judges would be African Americans. But the state supermajority Republican legislator passed a special rule that set a process in place for selection of judges outside of the electoral process. And so it's an ongoing process, and it's a lengthy story, but that's a summary of what occurred, caller.
And Attorney Lee, if you could, that the interviews are going to be public, where the public can attend. If you have that information, can you share that with the listening audience before your program is up, so at least the constituents here in Marion County can be engaged in that process to the extent that we can be?
I don't have it in front of me because I wasn't prepared to talk about that. I could probably get it. I'll make a call before the show's over for one of my friends to have them email that to me and try to post it on the website, okay? Okay.
Attorney Lee?
Yes.
Also, I'm trying to pull it up, and if not, perhaps we can talk about it next week. But I read about 2 African-American female judges that have been nominated for judgeships by President Biden that are Valparaiso Law School alumni, where I went to law school. Are you familiar with those 2 female judges?
I'm familiar with the federal judges, but I don't recall their names of people right now off the top of my head.
I'll try to pull those up during the call or the.
Yeah, but that's a different issue. We have the federal process, which I've worked on, and then the Marion County situations, but
absolutely. I know you've worked on both, and I wanted to commend you for your work on the federal level as well.
Okay, Ms. Thomas, you have a question or comment for our judge today? Hello?
Hello?
Yes,
Hello?
sir. You have a question or comment for our judge today, or our guest?
Oh, you talking to me?
Yes, sir.
Oh, no, yeah, I do. Recently, we had 2 police officers on trial for using excessive force on 2 protesters, and I just wonder what is reasonable and what is brutality. And obviously, what I saw was just outright brutality. They wouldn't do an animal like that, the way they did these 2 women. I don't know if they were just all hyped up in the Black Lives Matter protest or what, but these 2 gentlemen are a threat to society as long as they wear a badge and a gun, and they need to be gone immediately. And if they are acquitted, basically the system is saying definitely Black lives don't matter, and especially Black women, because the way they beat that woman is savage, just pure barbarity.
Well, I think one of the women were white, one was Black, and I did see the video. And early this morning, the jury came back with a not guilty verdict on 8 of the charges and hung on 4 of them. I'm familiar with the case, but I'll let one of the lawyers or judges answer the question as to what is deemed excessive force. And I understand your frustration about this matter.
These are 2 road cops. They got no business wearing a uniform. In fact, they're thugs. They wouldn't beat a German Shepherd like that, the way they beat those 2 women.
Okay. Counsel, judge, you have an opinion as to what is deemed excessive force?
I'll let the judge answer it, but I got a lot of my own.
You're the original expert on excessive force with Rodney King. That was the evolution of litigation on excessive force that was videotaped.
I think it's excessive force when you beat a person beyond the need to subdue them. When you continue to beat them after the person is unconscious or helpless or has surrendered, then any force that you apply after that is excessive. You saw it in the King case with them hitting him over 50 sometimes with the baton and tasing him, and the man was pleading for his life. That was excessive. You don't have to ask a scientist or a doctor, is that excessive? It's like in anything we do, it's a judgment, but the human mind tells you when it is excessive or when it's enough or when it's not. So it's no scientific measure of it. It's just common sense.
Yeah, and every police department has rules, regulations. Every state has laws in regards to excessive force. It's something that's in regards to, no different in regards to mental health in the sense of training. The more training we have for our officers, not only in regards to mental health, but in regards to handling folks and dealing with things outside of different pressure, but staying within bounds of those rules, those regulations for not only their department, but within the state. I go back in regards to what makes a good judge. And I sit there and tell and express to folks, at least here in Cook County, we have some of the best judges within the state. I'd say some within the best in the country. However, they, while qualified, my response goes to what makes a good judge, in my opinion, as someone is when my wife is in front of you, when my daughter is in front of you, when my child with autism is in front of you, how do you treat them? Do you treat them
Right.
with respect? Do they walk out of there
Right.
feeling like they were heard? Do they
Right.
walk out of there, regardless of the outcome, feeling like they were heard, they were respected, and treated fairly? And that's what matters.
Of course, I agree with everything that has been said, and police officers, from my perspective, should nationally be trained in de-escalation of situations that they encounter, and that they should only use that degree of force or the minimal amount of force that is necessary to contain a specific situation. And excessive force is police brutality, and it's the use of force that is beyond that which a reasonable police officer should use to address or apprehend an individual.
Well, that's great. And now, my producer sent me the information to show. We're going to post it on our notice, but the conference for the judges, the Marion County Court, there were 23 applicants for the 2 Marion County Trial Court judicial position. One is in the family division and one is in the criminal division. The interviews for judges will be held in the Supreme Court conference room, the State House, room 319, that's located at 200 West Washington Street, Indianapolis. The interviews are open to the public and they're posted on the website. They start on Friday, December 15th at 9 o'clock, and they go on Monday, December 18th, start again at 9 o'clock. And so all the 23 candidates will have about 10 minutes each. One of my former lawyer is in the group for the civil court. That's attorney Tara Milton, and she will be interviewed on Monday, December 18th at 9:40 to 10 o'clock. Tara Milton, she's outstanding judge, outstanding lawyer, and I ask that you support her. Highly skilled. By the way, all these judges that applied, from what I've seen, most of them, they're qualified. And so, but I know Tara, she worked for my firm and did an outstanding job, so please support her. Imhotep, our next call, you got a question for the judge or my panel, sir?
Yes, how you doing? Can you hear me, Brother Nate?
I'm doing great, sir.
Good, and hello to all your guests, stuff like that. I just want to throw one thing out there that seems to never get mentioned when we have these discussions about police brutality and excessive force. There's the FBI reports from 2006, 2012, 2015, and 16 that highlighted the rise of white supremacist groups and neo-Nazis and KKK in law enforcement. This is from the FBI. And then we've just had a chief of police, former chief of police from California that just got 11 and a half years in federal prison yesterday for January 6th. We can't overlook this fact. And no one wants to bring this up, and I respect the judge, and I know he has bound by the laws and Constitution. But as far as the legislators are concerned, we're battling an uphill battle when we got Mike Johnson, the representative, the House Speaker, who looks to hide faces of people who were at January 6th, which was a lot of law enforcement was there. A lot of law enforcement was there. So I've asked the chief here this question. I've asked the deputy chief, Kendall Adams, what steps they take to try to keep these people off the force, and no one gives me any clear answers. I'd like to hear you all's thoughts on this. Thank you.
That's a loaded question. Hey, Judge, you have one final comment. I know you got to go take care of the babies. You got a final comment before you depart today, sir?
No, just thank you all for having me on. I appreciate it, and especially with the esteemed panel that you all have. I appreciate you all's work, and again, thank you for the time.
Thank you very much. Now, let me explain to Imhotep how the process works now in Indianapolis. Real quickly, I'm familiar with this process because I've represented a number of people successfully that sued the police department. Even though I represent a police officer, we sue a lot of police officers. And here's the process now. Deputy Chief Kendall Adams, he does an internal criminal investigation to determine whether or not the conduct by the officers is cross the line to be considered to be a crime. They collect evidence on each shooting, and that evidence is then turned over to the Marion County Prosecutor's Office. Now, their goal is to collect the evidence, and then the prosecutor's office make a decision. The problem what they're having right now with this process, and I think the mayor need to fix this, is that they don't talk to the police officer. So we were successful in doing these cases in the 90s because the police officers were required to give a video interview, and we could use that interview. Once we compare it to the evidence, we could win the case. Now, the officer may not give a statement until a year later after he talked to the lawyers, and lawyers advise them. They've looked at all the physical evidence, all the witness statement, and then they're able to formulate a response based on the evidence they've seen. And so the flaw in our process right now in terms of these police shooting investigation is this. They should require, folks, they need to require that the officer give a recorded statement within 1 hour of each shooting, a recorded statement that details exactly what happens. The shooting that people complain about, the gentleman in the tree, the officer that actually shot him was not the officer that was actually pursuing him originally. And there's 3 officers there, a guy in a tree, and only 1 officer shoot the suspect who says he's having a mental health crisis. It's troubled me because if he's in a tree, if they just back up and de-escalate the situation, then the young man is still alive today because eventually he'll fall out the tree. So he said, I'm not armed. I'm having a mental health issue. Don't reach it, don't reach it. Bam, shoots him. You know, so that's my answer to that. And I think it's a flawed process right now that we need to fix. Now, what's interesting about Indianapolis, unlike most cities, Indianapolis has a process where there's about 50 citizens who come in, review this evidence. They have a police oversight committee. So Indianapolis process de-escalate the situation publicly because they have community involvement in the investigatory process. But the investigatory process has this inherent weakness, not requiring an officer to give a statement immediately after shooting, give them an unfair advantage. And so this trial that they just had with these officers that were acquitted of 8 of the charges last night or this morning, those officers had all the other officers testified that they complied with policy. So, you know, it's difficult cases to win. And right now, the FOP support officers, whether they're doing a good job or bad job, they support them right or wrong. And it's a very powerful voice. So that was a good question. Milton,
Nate,
you guys have a comment?
I agree. I agree with you that I think it's 2 sides to the story, though. If you would look at any situation you've been involved in, be questioned immediately about what happened tends to or could lead to you making a mistake or forgetting a very important part of what happened within that first hour because of the adrenaline rush or whatever happens with the brain. And it might be unfair to the person that is being investigated as opposed to a questioning of that person a day later or some more hours later that could afford them an opportunity to gather themselves and step back and put their recollection of events together. So I don't know necessarily when you are best able to get the truth and the story that really happened from a person. I'd probably support your position. I say probably because I'm not sure if I fully do, but I can understand why you would say that. But sometimes people remember things and 2 hours later or a day later that they don't remember immediately after an incident. Don't you think?
Well, here's why I say that. It's very important for people to understand why this is so important. When you do a videotape statement, you examine the clothing, you examine the weapon that's used, you investigate the circumstance of the usage. And each of the cases that I did in which they took a videotape statement of the officer, I would then follow up with a detailed, lengthy deposition that went for at least 8 hours. Now, the reason that's important is that every aspect of a shooting must be carefully explored. In other words,
right.
The issue in the case is whether or not an officer has a reasonable belief that his life, another person's life, was in danger at the time he fires the weapon. And so it requires a detailed analysis as to what he was actually looking at and what triggered this officer to shoot an unarmed suspect. And so, what was his hand? What was his eyes? What was he wearing? What was the light in? There's just literally speaking, I usually have about 500 more questions about the technical aspect about it. And so the video footage of it, I can go into some specific details to talk about the science of it, the biomechanics of how your weapons, when you fire a weapon, for example, once he articulates firing a weapon, you then can backtrace his location by the projectile of the shells. So when they fired a pistol, it projects out, say, between 36 to 44 inches. You then can determine where he was standing. Then you look at the obstacle. Well, was he in danger? How far was he away? You could tell that. You take the body, you measure it, so you could reconstruct the scene based upon the statement. And so, and there's a lot of other reasons I can go into, but essentially, in this analysis, I've been able to obtain what is tantamount to a confession by the officer in several cases by just going through it step by step by step. One of the more famous cases I did involved Ricky Jerome Macon, guy who started a prison riot, and we were able to extrapolate from the officer who caused the death, basically inadvertently confessed to the killing during the deposition. So that's why I need those videotapes statements right away.
I'm not arguing against what you say you need and your extensive examination of the officer being accused, but I appreciate that. I am probably representing the victims in as many cases as anyone else of the officer shooting. But I'm just stepping back and saying, what's fair in this inquisition or this investigation or this questioning? What's fair? And if I'm on the other side, I think I have some things to argue about the unfairness of that immediate questioning of my client. I'm just looking at the other side. I guess I'm being a devil's advocate on your position. But I can see some arguments against that and why the officers need time to collect themselves. That's all.
I think that's a good point.
Maybe he's going to prepare a good lie, or maybe not.
I think it's an excellent point, and Attorney Banks, also Attorney Grimes, because that's what they do to defendants all the time. When the defendants are involved in anything, they immediately start interrogating them at the scene. They don't get a 1 hour break, Attorney Grimes. They start talking to them right away, and they're recording it.
And I'm going to object to it, and I want to suppress it all because you didn't have counsel.
Lots of luck with that Fourth Amendment, the prophylactic rule that's been eviscerated over the years.
Yeah, I got you.
One comment in response to the caller's question regarding the concern of the infiltration, if you will, of white supremacy groups in law enforcement. I think the question, of course, there's documented links and evidence of that fact. And the question becomes, how do you root it out, number one? And two, on the front end, how do you vet candidates to investigate their background and history and connection with these groups? And as you know, domestic terrorism has been reported as the greatest threat to national security in our nation. So it's a really huge concern that we have such ideologies in our law enforcement departments across the nation.
Miss Banks, I just read in this morning's paper or something that one of my favorite tennis stars, cancer has returned. What's her name?
Chris Evert.
Yeah, Chris Evert. I think racism is a cancer in our society, and we can put it into submission. We can expose it. It keeps coming back, and I don't know what we're going to do to root out these racist officers. I believe I was before a racist judge yesterday, and my client looked at me, and I looked at my client, because this judge, it was a co-defendant case, and the other defendant was represented by a white attorney, and it was like I wasn't in the courtroom. It just is something that we have to deal with when it comes up, and face it and put it on the table like the elephant in the room. I expect I'm going to have problems with this judge in the future of this case. But I know that's not direct answer to your question, Vanita, but it's something that we have to contend with. It's not gone. And these officers who are members of these clubs that you know are based on racism, they're going to have to be dealt with and rooted out as best we can. I just don't have the answer. Yeah. No.
Hey, counsel, when I had that problem, I filed a complaint against the judge because there's under the judicial canon, one of the things, they have to be fair and objective. If you suspect racism, I file a complaint. You don't like it.
No overt act that I can, I'm sorry to interrupt you, no overt act that I can attach to. It was the vibe, it was his ignoring, it was the conduct. It was like, damn, why did I take this case here, boy? This is in another county, and they have different game plan down there. So I hear you. I file complaints against judges in my time too, but
well, you got the most famous ethical issues in the country out there. You got what's that lawyer, Tom, whatever his name, that had 100 complaints and this ethics committee sat on it forever. Who's that guy?
Tom Girardi.
Tom
Girardi. Yeah, Girardi.
Thank you. Stole all the millions of dollars and got away with it because he sound like he was bribing judges and everybody else in the process. It's incredible, man.
Yeah. But it's all over the country. You know, I'm reading this book right now, Nate, about the lost indictment of Robert E. Lee. And here is one of the most notorious serial killers of our time, not our time, but in history. And the brutality that was exhibited upon Blacks that were in the Union Army by the Confederacy, the brutality and the murder of them, and the starvation, etc., and the torture of them. And this man killed hundreds of thousands of men under the warfare, but he didn't treat them as other soldiers were treated. But this man was never prosecuted in a court for being a traitor and his crimes. And it's appalling the things that he got away with, and still people praise him as a good.
Is that the name
American.
of the book, Attorney Grimes?
The Lost Indictment of Robert E. Lee. It talks about how Lincoln said he was going to punish the leaders of the Confederacy, but he did not want to punish the leaders, quote. You know, Davis down as the president in the South, or Lee. And he backed off. And when Johnson took over after his assassination, Johnson promised that he was going to punish Lee and them. But Grant, our Union general, stood in the way and said, if you prosecute him civilly, I'll resign my commission. So Grant held them at bay because of his influence over the country, and protected Lee. So it's really not confusing. It's just conflicting on how Lee never faced punishment for his crime. But he died 5 years later. They say he died a painful death in his last few days, but he didn't get to court. He didn't get to court.
Well, man, that's a powerful book to read. The Lost Indictment of Robert E. Lee.
Look, they had an exchange program during the Civil War because they had too many prisoners to take care of and fight the war. So they decided, we're going to exchange one Confederate for one Union soldier. Here, this one can be released. You release another soldier. Lee said, and when they said, okay, y'all got some black soldiers, you got some ex-slaves in captivity. He said, I will not release a colored soldier to be free. I will only release them to their master to go back into slavery. So they could not continue with the exchange system because he refused to release a black man other than to his master that they would find. He was a cold dude.
What fascinating history. And we also saw across the nation in the aftermath of the Civil War that so many of these Confederate leaders were deitized across the nation, with all these statutes that we're reckoning with today. And I'm thinking, Attorney Grimes, that Ulysses Grant's position was probably more conciliatory to try to bring the nation back together because it was on the brink.
Vanita, I want to concede. I want to say you're right. I understand that rationale, but it went back to all these boys went to West Point together, they have an allegiance to one another like a fraternity in today's times. It didn't care, it didn't matter which side of the political spectrum they were on. And when you go back to the cruelty, like in the Andersonville prison, where they were starving some soldiers and just putting black soldiers in a hole and closing the door and not feeding them, not giving them water, and letting them starve to death. And how they would capture them in the field and they let the white soldiers put their hands up in a white flag and surrender, and the black soldiers be on their knees begging for mercy, and they tell them to stand up and then shoot them in the head and cut off their ear as a trophy. It's a cruelty that is unimaginable to me, and he was over all of that. Can't deny knowing about Andersonville prison because it was notorious for its ill treatment of all soldiers, especially the black soldiers.
And that's Ulysses.
That's
Ulysses Grant as well.
No, he was fighting for the Union and he fought against the Confederacy. But when it came down to the end of the war, he threatened Johnson and the others who were pushing for the prosecution of Robert E. Lee. They got an indictment, but they didn't prosecute him in the court. And he said, if you prosecute him, I quit. He knew he had enough influence. It was a risky thing in prosecuting any of those officers. They prosecuted some of the low-hanging fruit as far as the Confederate officers. And yeah, it was a touchy situation to keep this Union together, but they had to deal with that.
I understand. Like you say, they both, this was a fraternity with an alliance carved and created at West Point. I get it. Wow. I can't wait to read that book.
Incredible. The Lost Indictment of Robert E. Lee. Recommended reading by Attorney Milton Grimes. Thank you so much for that overview. We're now at the end of our time. I'd like to thank our callers for calling in today, our incredible producer. I'd like to thank each of you for watching our show on the internet and also listening in. Don't forget, join us next Saturday. We'll continue. There are so many pending legal issues now that we only went into a few today, but next weekend we'll try to cover a few more. So thank you all, and I look forward to talking to you next week. Take care, everyone. Have a blessed Saturday.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Have a great day.